A teenage girl charged 25 cents at the door for women, 50 cents for men. She rented the recreation room in her apartment building for $25. Her mother served snacks. Her father picked up sodas and beer. The date was August 11, 1973. The address was 1520 Sedgwick Avenue, in a Bronx neighborhood already half hollowed out by fire, abandonment, and a highway that had split the borough in two. Her brother set up 2 turntables connected to 2 amplifiers and a PA system with 2 speaker columns. And then, in that basement, in that dying borough, he did something no one had done before. He isolated the percussion break of one record, duplicated it on a second copy, and bounced back and forth between the two, extending a 30-second drum passage into a 5-minute loop of pure rhythm. 50 years later, the sound born in that room would travel to every corner of the world. Here's the question nobody quite answers. Why there? Why the South Bronx in 1973, and not Manhattan or Chicago or anywhere else? The answer runs deeper than one DJ, one party, one night. It runs through a highway, a fire, a Caribbean island, and the systematic unmaking of an American neighborhood. To understand why the South Bronx became a creative crucible, you have to see what the city was doing to it in the years before. At its peak around 1930, the Bronx was nearly half Jewish, and the South Bronx alone held 364,000 Jewish residents. By 1960, the neighborhood had flipped, 2/3 black or Puerto Rican. That shift did not happen by drift. It was displacement engineered at the institutional level. The mechanism was Robert Moses. As New York City's master builder for nearly 4 decades, Moses conceived the Cross-Bronx Expressway in 1948, the first highway ever built through a dense urban environment in the United States. 1 mile cost $40 million, equivalent to roughly $480 million today. Robert Caro, in The Power Broker, argued that Moses intentionally routed the expressway through this neighborhood, even though a viable option existed just 1 block south, a routing that would have spared thousands of homes. The expressway ripped through the heart of the Bronx, architect Ronald Schiffman observed, creating what was a wall between what eventually was known as the northern and southern part of the Bronx. The official displacement count was 1,500 residents, but the chain reaction was larger. Between 1969 and 1976, New York City lost 600,000 jobs. 300,000 manufacturing jobs evaporated. The city was nearly bankrupt by October 1975. Mayor Beam cut city services, including fire departments serving the South Bronx. What filled the void were landlords who calculated that burning their buildings for insurance money was more profitable than maintaining them. As the buildings burned, the borough lost 300,000 more residents in a decade. Entire city blocks became rubble fields. The South Bronx held the poorest congressional district in the United States. But into that devastation came a different population, carrying different music. Puerto Ricans had been coming to New York City since the 1940s. By the 1970s, they represented up to 80% of the city's Hispanic community and 12% of its total population. Nearly 70% of all Puerto Ricans on the mainland United States lived in New York City. African Americans arrived through a parallel current. The Great Migration northward accelerated when Columbia University bought up low-income housing in Harlem, pushing those residents further into the South Bronx. The borough's population surged by over 100,000 people in just a few years, a sudden compression of communities in a neighborhood already under economic siege. The critical fact is not just that Black and Latino communities were present in the South Bronx. It is that they were there together, in the same blocks, the same buildings, the same recreation rooms, with their music. And then a Jamaican teenager arrived. Clive Campbell came to the Bronx from Kingston, Jamaica, in November 1967 at age 13. His family moved into 1520 Sedgwick Avenue. Growing up in Kingston, he had absorbed Jamaican dance halls, massive outdoor speaker systems run by DJs whose job was to hold a crowd. The DJs spoke over records in a style called toasting, rhythmic commentary in patois over the beat. In the Bronx, his height earned him the nickname Hercules, shortened to Herc, and the graffiti tag Cool, giving the world DJ Cool Herc. What he noticed watching dancers was that when the band dropped away and the rhythm section ran alone, the floor came alive. These percussion breaks lasted maybe 30 seconds on a record. He bought 2 copies of the same record and extended those breaks into a continuous loop. The dancers who responded became the B-boys. The dance they invented was breakdancing. Joseph Sadler, Grandmaster Flash, grew up in the Throgs Neck projects. His father was a Caribbean record collector. At Samuel Gompers High School, Sadler learned to repair electronic equipment. When he tried to replicate Herc's technique, the needle skipped. He solved it with the quick mix theory, a fingertip to vinyl and crossfader method for cutting and repeating tiny fragments with precision. He cut circles of felt and wax paper to the size of a record and placed them under the vinyl, inventing the slip mat, still used under every DJ's record worldwide. Then came Grand Wizard Theodore, born in 1963. He was practicing DJing at home when his mother scolded him for the volume. While waiting, he held the record still and moved it slightly. The needle made a rhythmic scraping sound. Scratching was invented by a teenager holding still for his mother. Afrika Bambaataa added a 4th dimension. Born Lance Taylor in 1957 to Jamaican and Barbadian parents, he had risen to warlord of the Black Spades gang in the Bronx River projects. He founded the Universal Zulu Nation, redirecting gang members into hip-hop's 4 elements: DJing, emceeing, breakdancing, and graffiti writing. The music became a social structure. The word hip-hop arrived in 1978. Keef Cowboy, a member of Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, coined it while teasing a friend who had just enlisted. The term first appeared in print in January 1982 in an interview with Afrika Bambaataa in the East Village Eye. By then, something was already happening outside the Bronx. But why here? Why not Harlem, where the music scene was already established? Why not Brooklyn or Chicago? The geography of the South Bronx in 1973 created conditions that did not exist anywhere else simultaneously. The first condition was the absence of commercial venues. Harlem had jazz clubs. Manhattan's discotheques catered to a wealthier, older crowd. The South Bronx had none of that infrastructure. When Cool Herc needed a venue, the only option was public space, parks, playgrounds, the recreation rooms of apartment buildings. When you perform in a park, there is no booking agent, no record label, and no one to tell you what the music should sound like. The second condition was architecture. New York City's working-class residential buildings like 1520 Sedgwick Avenue had shared recreation rooms, bookable for private events, not street corners, not commercial clubs. The third condition was the Expressway itself. Here is the receipt. The historical record on 1520 Sedgwick Avenue notes, "The creation of the Cross Bronx Expressway uprooted thousands in the Bronx during the early 1970s, displacing communities and fostering white flight." 1520 Sedgwick Avenue is located on the Expressway. The building where hip-hop was invented sits on the same road that destroyed the neighborhood around it. The wound became the workshop. The fourth condition, no money for instruments, meant turntables became instruments. Electric guitars and drum kits require money and practice space. Second-hand turntables and a PA were achievable on a South Bronx budget. Grandmaster Flash's slip mat, felt and wax paper cut to the size of a record, was a solution born entirely of scarcity. And the fifth condition was the one no other American city could replicate: this specific mix of Caribbean cultures in one compressed geography. Kool Herc's Jamaican sound system tradition, Africa Bambaata's Jamaican and Barbadian parentage, the Puerto Rican community's deep relationship with Latin percussion and call and response. These communities were literal neighbors, sharing apartment buildings and hallways compressed by the same highway that had severed the Bronx in two. The South Bronx was not a backdrop. It was the instrument. The music left the Bronx faster than anyone expected. By 1979, hip-hop reached mainstream radio. Rapper's Delight by the Sugar Hill Gang peaked at number 36 on the U.S. Billboard Hot 100, reached number 1 in Canada and the Netherlands, and number 3 in the UK. The Library of Congress preserved it in the National Recording Registry in 2011. A detailed history tends to bury. A substantial portion of the lyrics were written by Grandmaster Caz, Curtis Brown, one of the original Bronx DJs. Big Bank Hank Jackson had borrowed Caz's rhyme book without asking. Grandmaster Caz was never credited or compensated. The gap between the people who invented the culture and those who profited from recording it would define the industry's relationship to hip-hop for decades. In 1982, Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five recorded The Message. Melly Mel told NPR the group hadn't wanted to record it. "We was used to doing party raps." It reached only number 62 in the United States, but in 2002, it became the first hip-hop recording added to the National Recording Registry. Rolling Stone ranked it number 59 on its 500 Greatest Songs list. That same year, Africa Bambaata's Universal Zulu Nation took hip-hop to France. Paris, Lyon, Metz, Belfort, Mulhouse. 9 years after 1520 Sedgwick Avenue, it was an international export. Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five became the first rap group inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2007. Kool Herc followed in 2023, and then the building itself came under threat. Starting in 2007, its owners sought to convert it to market-rate housing. Kool Herc appeared at a rally. He gave the address a name. 1520 Sedgwick, he said, is the Bethlehem of hip-hop culture. So why the South Bronx in 1973? Because a highway destroyed a neighborhood, and the destruction concentrated people who had nowhere else to go. Because poverty removed the commercial music infrastructure and replaced it with parks and rec rooms, exactly the venues where rules don't exist and experiments can happen. Because men whose families came from Jamaica and Barbados carried the memory of a different relationship between the DJ and the crowd, where the DJ was not a servant of the song, but the architect of the room. The breakbeat was not invented. It was uncovered. It was always in the music, that moment when the band drops away and the rhythm runs free. Kool Herc just decided that moment never needed to end. By any measure of global reach and commercial scale, hip-hop became one of the most dominant music genres the world has ever seen. And it was born in the poorest congressional district in the United States. What's still worth asking is how many other sounds are being made right now in places that the maps have already written off.